The transport ship shook hard as it entered the atmosphere of Vethros 7, and Sergeant Marcus Cole gripped the handle above his seat, while the other soldiers around him did the same. He had seen war before, had lost friends before, had watched his entire squad die in an ambush just 3 months ago on a frozen moon where the enemy had been waiting for them in the shadows. Now he was being sent to Camp Aegis, a joint military outpost where soldiers from 12 different alien species lived and fought together against the Dominion. And Marcus wondered if this was a fresh start or just another place where he would watch good people die. The ship landed with a heavy thud, and the rear doors opened to reveal a world of purple skies and strange, twisted trees that looked like they were made of metal rather than wood. Marcus grabbed his bag and walked down the ramp, his boots hitting the muddy ground as he took his first breath of alien air that tasted like copper and something sweet he could not name. Camp Aegis was larger than he expected, with buildings made from prefabricated metal panels and tents scattered across a valley surrounded by hills covered in thick fungal growth. Soldiers of all shapes and sizes moved through the camp, and Marcus saw species he recognized and others he had never encountered before. There were the tall and slender Velori with their blue skin and 4 arms, the short and stocky Grimnack, who looked like walking boulders with faces, and the insectoid chitterlings, who communicated through a series of clicks and whistles. But none of them prepared him for what he saw when he entered the mess hall that evening. Sitting alone at a table in the far corner was the largest living creature Marcus had ever seen outside of a vehicle. The alien stood at least 8 feet tall even while seated, with shoulders as wide as a doorway and arms thicker than Marcus's entire body. Of storm clouds, gray and rough like stone, and when it turned its head to look at the door, Marcus saw 4 yellow eyes that glowed like small suns, set into a face that could only be described as terrifying. This was a Vakorian, Marcus realized, remembering the briefings he had read on the transport. The Vakorians were new to the Coalition, a warrior species that had spent centuries conquering and destroying before something had changed their path and brought them to the side of peace. Most species in the Coalition did not trust them, and looking at the massive alien sitting alone, while every other table in the mess hall was crowded with soldiers, Marcus could see that distrust written clearly in the empty space around the creature. He grabbed a tray and filled it with food that looked questionable but smelled acceptable, and then he did something that made several nearby soldiers stop and stare. He walked directly toward the Vakorian's table. "That human doing," whispered a Velori soldier to his companion. "Getting himself killed," the companion replied with a shake of his head. Marcus ignored them all and stopped in front of the empty seat across from the giant alien. The Vakorian looked up at him with those 4 glowing eyes, and Marcus felt a chill run down his spine that he refused to show on his face. "Mind if I sit here?" Marcus asked, keeping his voice calm and steady. The Vakorian did not answer immediately, and the silence stretched between them like a wire pulled tight. When the alien finally spoke, his voice was deep and rumbling like thunder rolling across distant mountains. "You are either very brave or very foolish, small one." Marcus shrugged and sat down anyway, placing his tray on the table as if this was the most normal thing in the world. "Probably both," he admitted, picking up something that looked like a bread roll and taking a bite. Watched him eat, with an expression that Marcus could not read, those 4 eyes never blinking as they studied the human who had dared to approach. Unforgivable. Marcus waited, not pushing, just listening the way he would have listened to any soldier who needed to talk. "We had taken prisoners," Kraveth continued, his massive hands curling into fists on the table. "Enemy soldiers who had surrendered, who had thrown down their weapons and begged for mercy, and my orders were to execute them all." The alien paused, and Marcus saw something in those 4 eyes that looked almost like pain. "I refused," Kraveth said simply. I told my superiors that there was no honor in killing those who could not fight back, that true strength was shown in mercy, not in slaughter. That sounds like the right thing to do, Marcus said quietly. Kraveth let out a sound that might have been a bitter laugh. My people did not agree, small one, and they cast me out, stripped me of my rank and my family name, sent me here to fight alongside species who fear and hate me almost as much as my own kind does. Looked around the mess hall, at the soldiers who were still watching them from a safe distance, at the empty seats, and the suspicious glares, and the way everyone seemed to lean away from their table. People fear what they don't understand, Marcus said, turning back to face Kraveth, and they hate what they fear, and it's easier to stay afraid than to take a chance on someone different. And yet you took that chance, Kraveth observed, tilting his massive head. You saw a monster that everyone else avoided, and you chose to sit down and share a meal. I didn't see a monster, Marcus replied honestly. I saw a soldier eating alone, and I know what that feels like, and I figured maybe we could both use some company. The Vakorian stared at him for a long moment, and then something remarkable happened. Kraveth smiled, or at least made an expression that Marcus interpreted as a smile, his gray lips pulling back to reveal teeth that could probably bite through steel. You are a strange creature, Marcus Cole, the alien said, and there was warmth in his thunderous voice now. My people have a word for warriors who show courage in the face of the unknown, who reach out when others would pull away. What word is that? Marcus asked. Kalvor, Kraveth replied. It means one who walks toward fire, and it is considered one of the highest compliments a Vakorian can give. Marcus smiled back, raising his cup in a small salute. Well, Kraveth Ironblood, I think this could be the beginning of a beautiful friendship. The Vakorian raised his own cup, massive fingers wrapped around a container that looked like a thimble in his hand. Perhaps it could be, small one, he agreed. Perhaps it could be. And in that moment, in a mess hall on a war-torn alien world, two outcasts from very different places found something neither had expected to find. They found hope. 3 weeks had passed since that first meal together, and Marcus and Kraveth had become a familiar sight around Camp Aegis. The other soldiers still kept their distance, still whispered when the unlikely pair walked by, but the fear had slowly begun to mix with curiosity as they watched the small human and the giant alien share meals and training sessions and quiet conversations in the evening hours. Command had noticed too, and that was why Captain Vorax, a stern Valori officer with cold blue eyes, called them both into the briefing room on a morning when the purple sky was dark with storm clouds. We have a mission, the captain said without any greeting. Reconnaissance deep in Sector 7, through the fungal forests and past the toxic marshes, and we need volunteers who can work well together. Marcus glanced at Kraveth, and the Vakorian gave a small nod. We volunteer, Marcus said simply. Captain Vorax studied them both, with an expression that suggested he was not entirely sure this was a good idea. You will be part of a 6-person squad led by Lieutenant Greth, he continued, and I expect you both to follow orders and not cause any problems. Understood, Captain, Marcus replied, and Kraveth rumbled his agreement. The squad assembled at the edge of camp 2 hours later, and Marcus could immediately tell that none of the other 4 soldiers were happy about their new teammates. Lieutenant Greth was a Grimnak, short and wide and covered in rocky plates that served as natural armor, and he looked at Kraveth the way someone might look at a bomb that could explode at any moment. The others were 2 Valori scouts named Thessar and Vin, and a chitterling communications specialist whose name was a series of clicks that Marcus could not pronounce. Let me be clear, Lieutenant Greth said in his grinding voice. I did not ask for either of you, but I follow orders, so you follow mine. Maybe we all come back alive. Fair enough, Marcus agreed, and they set out into the fungal forest. The trees on Vethros 7 were not really trees at all, but massive fungal growths that stretched hundreds of feet into the sky, their caps blocking out most of the light and creating a world of shadows and strange sounds below. The squad moved in formation, with the Vellery scouts ahead, Greth and Marcus in the middle, and Kraveth bringing up the rear, because there was no way the massive Vakorian could move quietly enough to take point. They traveled for 2 days without incident, mapping Dominion patrol routes and marking supply caches for later raids, and Marcus began to think that maybe this mission would be one of the easy ones. He should have known better. The ambush came on the morning of the 3rd day, when they were crossing a clearing between 2 massive fungal stalks. Energy blasts erupted from the shadows, and Lieutenant Greth went down in the first volley, his rocky body shattered by a direct hit that would have killed any of them. "Contact!" screamed Thessar, returning fire into the darkness. Marcus dove behind a fallen stalk and started shooting at the muzzle flashes he could see, counting at least a dozen enemy positions surrounding them on 3 sides. The Dominion soldiers were Krethnar, reptilian warriors with scales like armor and eyes that could see in the dark, and they had clearly been waiting for the coalition squad to walk right into their trap. Vin took a blast to the shoulder and went down screaming, and the chitterling was trying to send a distress signal, but the communication equipment was sparking and broken from the first volley. "We have to move," Marcus shouted over the noise of battle. "There are too many," Thessar yelled back, fear clear in his voice. And then Kraveth charged. The Vakorian erupted from cover like a force of nature, his massive body absorbing energy blasts that would have killed any other species as he crashed into the nearest enemy position with a roar that shook the fungal stalks around them. Marcus had never seen anything like it, had never imagined that a living creature could be so powerful and so terrifying and so unstoppable all at once. Kraveth tore through the Dominion soldiers like they were made of paper, his huge fists crushing armor and breaking weapons, creating chaos in the enemy ranks that gave the rest of the squad a chance to run. "Go!" the Vakorian bellowed. "I will hold them." Marcus hesitated for only a second before grabbing Vin and helping Thessar drag their wounded comrade into the shadows of the forest. They ran and did not look back, even when they heard the sounds of battle fade behind them, even when the screams stopped and silence fell over the fungal forest like a shroud. 3 hours later, Marcus made a decision. "I am going back for him," announced. Thessar looked at him like he had gone insane. "The Vakorian is dead," the Vellery said flatly. "No one could survive that many enemies, not even one of his kind." "Then I will find his body and bring him home," Marcus replied, checking his weapon. "You will die," Thessar insisted. Marcus shrugged and started walking back the way they had come. "Maybe," he called over his shoulder, "but I am not leaving him behind." He found Kraveth an hour later, slumped against a fungal stalk, surrounded by the bodies of at least 20 Dominion soldiers. The Vakorian was alive, but barely, with wounds covering his massive body and one arm hanging at an angle that suggested it was broken in several places. "Small one," Kraveth rumbled weakly when Marcus appeared. "You should not have come back." "Yeah, well," Marcus said, kneeling beside the alien and pulling out his medical kit. "I am not very good at following orders." 3 days were the hardest of Marcus's life. He treated Kraveth's wounds, using human medical knowledge that had never been tested on Vakorian physiology, guessing and hoping and praying to whatever gods might be listening that he was not making things worse. When the Vakorian could not walk, Marcus rigged a makeshift stretcher and dragged him through the forest, inch by painful inch. When Marcus collapsed from toxic exposure after accidentally breathing spores from a poisonous fungal bloom, Kraveth woke from his fever and carried the human on his back for miles, stumbling and falling and getting up again, because giving up was not something either of them knew how to do. They talked during the quiet moments, sharing stories of their pasts and their hopes and their fears. Kraveth told Marcus about his homeworld, about the mate he had lost to disease and the children he had never had, about the honor code that had defined his entire life until the day he chose mercy over murder. Marcus told Kraveth about Earth, about the family he had left behind and the friends he had lost, about the nightmares that woke him every night with the faces of dead soldiers burned into his mind. And somewhere in those 3 days of blood and pain and survival, something changed between them. "There is a bond among my people," Kraveth said on the third night, as they huddled in a cave waiting for the morning light. "A sacred connection between warriors who have bled together and saved each other's lives." "What kind of bond?" Marcus asked quietly. "It is called Khalif," the Vakorian explained, "and it is deeper than friendship, deeper than brotherhood, deeper than any connection most species can understand, and it has never been offered to anyone outside our kind in over 1,000 years. He paused, and his 4 eyes found Marcus in the darkness. Until now, Marcus did not fully understand the words Kraveth spoke next. Ancient Vakorian phrases that seemed to vibrate in the air with weight and power. But he felt them in his chest like a second heartbeat. And when the coalition rescue ships finally appeared the next morning, drawn by a distress beacon Marcus had finally managed to repair, the soldiers who found them saw something unprecedented. They saw a human and a Vakorian standing side by side, covered in blood and dirt and wounds that should have killed them both, but standing nonetheless, standing together. "What happened out there?" one of the rescue soldiers asked. Marcus looked at Kraveth, and the Vakorian looked back at him, and neither of them had words that could explain what they had been through and what they had become. "We survived," Marcus said simply. But they both knew it was so much more than that. News traveled fast in the coalition, and within days of their rescue, every species from Earth to the farthest reaches of known space had heard about what happened in the fungal forests of Vethros 7. A human and a Vakorian had formed Khaleth, the sacred warrior bond that the gray giants had guarded jealously for over 1,000 years. Some called it a miracle, a sign that even the most different species could find common ground in the fires of war. Others called it an insult, a violation of ancient traditions, a mistake that needed to be corrected before it caused diplomatic disaster. Marcus learned about the controversy when 2 military police officers arrived at his recovery room in the Camp Aegis Medical Center and told him he was being transported to Celestine Prime, the orbital station that housed the Coalition High Council. "Am I under arrest?" Marcus asked as they escorted him to a transport shuttle. "Not exactly," one of the officers replied, though his tone suggested that the answer was more complicated than those 2 words. Kraveth was already on the shuttle when Marcus boarded, the massive Vakorian looking uncomfortable in a seat designed for much smaller species. "They are taking us before the council," Kraveth rumbled, "to answer for the bond we have formed." "Answer for it?" Marcus repeated, sitting down beside his friend. "We didn't do anything wrong." "To you, perhaps not," the Vakorian said quietly, "but to my people, what we have done is either the greatest honor or the greatest shame in generations, and they have not yet decided which." Celestine Prime was a massive station, a spinning wheel of metal and glass that orbited a gas giant at the heart of Coalition space. The council chambers were located at the center of the wheel, a vast circular room where representatives from every member species sat in tiered seats surrounding a small platform in the middle. Felt so small in his entire life, as he did when he walked onto that platform and looked up at the hundreds of alien faces staring down at him. Kraveth stood beside him, and even the massive Vakorian seemed diminished in this space designed to make individuals feel the weight of galactic judgment. "Sergeant Marcus Cole of Earth," announced a booming voice that came from everywhere and nowhere. "And Kraveth of Vakor, You have been brought before this council to address the matter of your alleged Kaleth bond. The Vakorian ambassador rose from her seat, an ancient warrior woman whose gray skin was covered in scars and whose 4 eyes blazed with an emotion Marcus could not read. I am Ambassador Threlketh, she declared, and I demand to know how this human dared to accept a bond that has been sacred to our people since before his species learned to walk upright. Marcus opened his mouth to respond, but Kraveth spoke first. It, the male Vakorian said, his voice steady despite the pressure of standing before the highest authority in the galaxy. He found me when I had been abandoned, showed me kindness when everyone else showed me fear, saved my life when it would have been easier to let me die, and stayed beside me through 3 days of hell when any sane creature would have run. You were exiled, Ambassador Threlketh shot back, cast out for your weakness, and you had no right to offer Kaleth to anyone, let alone an outsider. I was exiled for showing mercy, Kraveth replied, and there was anger in his voice now, for refusing to execute helpless prisoners, for choosing honor over blind obedience, and if that makes me weak, then perhaps our definition of strength needs to change. The chamber erupted in murmurs and whispers, and Marcus could see representatives from dozens of species leaning in to discuss what they were witnessing. With gray hair and sharp eyes, who Marcus did not recognize. If I may, she said, and the chamber slowly quieted, I would like to hear from Sergeant Cole directly, since this matter concerns him as much as anyone. Marcus swallowed hard and stepped forward. I don't understand all the politics here, he admitted, and I don't know all the rules and traditions that I apparently broke, but I know this much. He looked up at the assembled council, at the alien faces that held so much power over his future. I sat down at that table because I saw a soldier eating alone, and where I come from, that matters. Not what species you are, or how tall you are, or what your people think of you, just that you're a person who could use a friend. The chamber was silent now, every eye and sensor focused on the small human on the platform. Kraveth saved my life out there in those forests, Marcus continued, and I saved his, and we went through things together that I can't even describe. Things that changed us both. And if that's what Kaleth means, then I'm honored to have it. He turned to look at Ambassador Threlketh directly. I've been told that I can renounce this bond, he said, that I can take back whatever I accepted and make all of this go away, make it nice and neat and comfortable for everyone who's scared of what we represent. He paused, letting his words settle over the assembly. But where I come from, we don't abandon the people who stood beside us, and I don't care how tall he is or what planet he's from. Kraveth is my brother now, and nothing this council or anyone else says is going to change that. The silence that followed was so complete that Marcus could hear his own heartbeat echoing in his ears. And then Ambassador Threlketh did something unexpected. She laughed. It was not a cruel laugh or a mocking one, but something that sounded almost like approval, and she shook her head, scarred head, slowly, as she looked down at the human who had just challenged the entire Vakorian tradition. You have spirit, small one, she said, using the same term that Kraveth always used for Marcus. And perhaps more courage than sense, but I begin to understand what my wayward kinsman sees in your kind. She turned to address the full council. The Vakorian people will not challenge this bond, she announced, and gasps echoed through the chamber. It was offered and accepted in accordance with our oldest laws, forged in blood and fire and sacrifice, and we will honor it, as we honor all true Kaleth. She looked back at Marcus with something new in her 4 eyes, something that might have been respect. Perhaps humans are more than we believed, she said quietly. The council voted to officially sanction the bond, recognizing it as a legitimate diplomatic connection between Earth and Vakor, and when Marcus and Kraveth finally walked out of those chambers, they walked out as something the galaxy had never seen before. Partners, brothers, a living symbol of what was possible when different species chose trust over fear. "That was well spoken, small one," Kravith said as they boarded the shuttle back to Vethros 7. Marcus shrugged, though he could not hide his smile. "I just told the truth," he replied. Kravith placed a massive hand on his shoulder, gentle despite its size. "Sometimes the truth is the bravest thing anyone can speak," the Vakorian said, "and today you reminded the galaxy of that." Marcus looked out the shuttle window at the stars stretching into infinity. "So what happens now?" he asked. Kravith settled back in his seat, his four eyes bright with something that looked like anticipation. "Now we show them what Kaleth can truly accomplish," he rumbled. And Marcus grinned, because for the first time in months, he was looking forward to whatever came next. 6 months after the council hearing, the war against the Dominion reached its most critical moment. Coalition intelligence had discovered a massive communications array on the outer moon of Dominion Prime, a facility that coordinated all enemy forces across 100 star systems and served as the beating heart of their military operations. Destroying it would cripple the Dominion for years, perhaps decades, and turn the tide of a war that had already cost millions of lives. But the mission was considered suicide, a one-way trip into the most heavily defended territory in the galaxy, and command needed volunteers who were willing to die for a chance at victory. Marcus and Kravith were the first to step forward. "Do you understand what you are signing up for?" asked General Voss, the human officer who had been given command of the strike team. "The odds of survival are less than 10%, and that estimate is probable generous." "We understand," Marcus replied. Glancing at Kravith beside him. "Then welcome to Operation Starfall," the general said, "and may whatever gods you believe in watch over us all." The strike team consisted of 12 soldiers from 8 different species, each one chosen for specific skills that would be needed to penetrate the enemy defenses and reach the array. There were demolitions experts and hackers, scouts and heavy weapons specialists, and at the center of it all were Marcus and Kravith, the bonded pair whose coordination in combat had become legendary throughout the coalition. They trained for 3 weeks, running simulations and studying blueprints, and learning each other's strengths and weaknesses until they could anticipate each other's moves without speaking. And then they loaded into a stealth transport and made the jump to Dominion space. The moon was gray and lifeless, a barren rock covered in military installations and defensive platforms that bristled with weapons capable of destroying entire fleets. The strike team landed in a canyon 5 miles from the communications array. Their ship immediately detected and destroyed by automatic defenses that would have killed them all if they had still been aboard. "We have 2 hours before they realize the ship was empty and start searching for survivors," General Voss announced as they moved through the shadows. "Let's make them count." The journey to the array was brutal. They lost 2 soldiers in the first mile, caught by a patrol that appeared from nowhere and opened fire before anyone could react. They lost another 3, breaching the outer perimeter, their bodies left behind as the survivors pushed forward through tunnels filled with automated defenses and enemy troops. By the time they reached the array itself, only 7 of the original 12 remained, and most of them were wounded. "The charges are set," announced Thessar, the Valori demolitions expert who had somehow survived his injuries from the first mission on Vethros 7, and volunteered for this one too. "But the detonator is damaged, and someone will have to trigger it manually." Everyone knew what that meant. A manual trigger meant staying behind, meant dying in the explosion that would destroy the array and save the Coalition fleet, meant making the ultimate sacrifice. "I will do it," Kravith said immediately, stepping forward. Marcus grabbed his arm. "No," he said firmly. "This is my chance at redemption," the Vakorian replied, his 4 eyes meeting Marcus's gaze. "A chance to die with honor after everything I have lost, and I will not let you take that from me." Kaleth means together, Marcus shot back. You told me that yourself, so if you stay, I stay. That is foolish. Yeah, well, you should be used to that by now. General Voss stepped between them, blood running down his face from a wound he had not bothered to treat. Both of you stop, he ordered. We need options, not arguments. So start thinking like the soldiers you are. Marcus closed his eyes and forced himself to calm down, to think, to use the brain that had gotten him through a dozen impossible situations before this one. The detonator is damaged, he said slowly, but the charges themselves are fine, right? Correct, Thessar confirmed. And the array's power core, Marcus continued. It generates enough energy to power a small city, doesn't it? Kravet's eyes widened as he understood what Marcus was suggesting. You want to overload the core, the Vakorian rumbled. Use its own power to trigger the charges remotely. It would take precise timing, Thessar said, his forearms already moving across his equipment. And someone would have to manually override the safety systems at the core itself. But theoretically, it could work. How much time would we have to escape? General Voss asked. Thessar calculated quickly. Maybe 4 minutes, maybe less, and the extraction point is 6 minutes away at full sprint. Then we do it faster, Marcus said simply. What followed was the most intense 4 minutes of Marcus's life. He and Kraveth fought their way to the power core, while the others held the main corridor, cutting through Dominion soldiers who seemed to appear from every shadow and doorway. They moved like a single organism, Marcus's speed and precision complementing Kraveth's power and endurance, their bond allowing them to anticipate each other's moves and cover each other's weaknesses. When they reached the core, Marcus worked the controls while Kraveth held the door against a wave of enemies that would have overwhelmed any normal soldier. Override complete, Marcus shouted. We have 3 minutes and 40 seconds. They ran. The extraction point was on the surface, a small landing pad where a second stealth transport was supposed to be waiting, and the path there was a maze of corridors and lifts and enemy troops who seemed to multiply with every passing second. General Voss went down at the 2-minute mark, his legs shattered by an explosion that killed 2 enemy soldiers, but left him unable to walk. Leave me, he ordered. Get to the transport. Marcus ignored him and grabbed one arm, while Kraveth grabbed the other, and they dragged the general through the chaos as the clock ticked down. 1 minute. Thessar fell, his body riddled with energy blasts, but his sacrifice bought them precious seconds to reach the final corridor. 45 seconds. The surface hatch was ahead, and beyond it, Marcus could see the transport's lights, could hear the engines warming up. 30 seconds. They burst through the hatch and ran across the landing pad, enemy fire streaking past them from every direction. 20 seconds. Through General Voss into the transport and turned to provide covering fire. 10 seconds. Marcus grabbed Kraveth's arm and pulled him inside. 5 seconds. The transport lifted off, and then the moon exploded. Not all of it, but enough. The communications array and everything around it consumed by a fireball that lit up the sky like a second sun. Marcus watched through the viewport as the shockwave chased them, as their pilot pushed the engines beyond their limits, as they crossed the threshold from certain death to impossible survival. And then they were in hyperspace, and the moon was far behind them, and Marcus realized he was laughing. He could not stop laughing, and beside him Kraveth was making a sound that Marcus had never heard before, a deep rumbling that vibrated through the transport's deck. The Vakorian was laughing too. Humans, Kraveth finally managed to say, you are all completely insane. His bonded brother, at the 8-foot alien who had become the closest friend he had ever known. That's why you like us, he replied. Kraveth's 4 eyes sparkled with something that looked like joy. Yes, the Vakorian admitted, I suppose it is. General Voss looked at them both from his position on the medical bench, his shattered legs being treated by the transport's automated systems. "You two just saved the entire coalition," he said quietly, "and I have no idea how you did it." Marcus and Kraveth looked at each other. "Together," they said in unison. And in that moment, flying through hyperspace away from the burning remains of an enemy stronghold, they knew that nothing in the galaxy would ever break what they had built. 1 year after the destruction of the communications array, the war finally ended. The Dominion, crippled by the loss of their coordination network, had fragmented into a dozen warring factions that turned on each other instead of the coalition. Peace treaties were signed, borders were redrawn, and soldiers who had spent years fighting for survival suddenly found themselves wondering what came next. For Marcus and Kraveth, what came next was something neither of them had ever expected. They were going to Earth. "I do not understand why this ceremony cannot be held on Celestine Prime," Kraveth grumbled as their transport entered Earth's atmosphere. "Or on Vakor, or anywhere that does not require me to squeeze through doors designed for species half my size." Marcus laughed and looked out the window at the blue and green worlds spreading out below them. "Because this is where humans come from," he explained. "The bond between our species is real, that it matters, and there's no better way to do that than to bring you home with me." Home. It was a strange word to use for a planet Marcus had not seen in almost 3 years, a place that felt more like a memory than a destination. But as the transport descended through the clouds and he saw the city of Geneva spread out below them, surrounded by mountains and lakes that sparkled in the afternoon sun, something tight in his chest began to loosen. He was home. The ceremony was held in the Palace of Nations, a building that had stood for centuries as a symbol of human cooperation and had now been chosen to represent something even greater. Thousands of people filled the grand hall, humans and aliens standing side by side, dignitaries and common citizens united in their desire to witness something historic. Marcus and Kraveth walked down the central aisle together, their footsteps echoing in the sudden silence that fell over the crowd. They had been given medals and honors from a dozen different species, had been called heroes and legends, and symbols of everything the coalition was supposed to represent. But none of that mattered, as much as the simple fact that they were walking this path together. The Secretary General of Earth, a woman named Elena Vasquez, with kind eyes and a warm smile, stood at the podium waiting for them. "We are gathered here today to honor 2 soldiers," she began, her voice carrying across the hall. "2 warriors from different worlds who found in each other what so many spend their entire lives seeking." She paused, looking at Marcus and Kraveth with something like wonder. They found brotherhood. The ceremony continued with speeches from coalition leaders and military commanders, with presentations of medals that neither Marcus nor Kraveth particularly cared about, with enough formal protocol to make them both wish they were back, in the field where things were simpler. But finally, it was over, and they were able to escape the crowds and the cameras and the endless questions about what Kaleth meant and how it felt to be bonded with an alien species. Marcus led Kraveth through the streets of Geneva, past buildings old and new, past humans who stopped and stared at the 8-foot alien walking among them, with expressions that ranged from fear to fascination to simple curiosity. "Where are we going?" Kraveth asked. "Somewhere quiet," Marcus replied. "Somewhere we can actually think." He found what he was looking for on the edge of the city, a small park on a hill that overlooked the lake and the mountains beyond. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and red and gold, and Marcus stood at the railing and breathed in the cool evening air that tasted like nothing he had smelled on any alien world. Kraveth stood beside him, his massive form casting a shadow that stretched across the grass behind them. "It is beautiful," the Vakorian admitted quietly. Your world, I mean. I understand now why your people fight so hard to protect it. Every species has something worth protecting, Marcus replied. That's what this whole war was about, wasn't it? Protecting the things we love. Kraveth nodded slowly. I received a message from Ambassador Threlketh, he said after a long moment of comfortable silence. She has invited me to return to Vacor, to take a position of leadership among our people, to help guide them toward a new understanding of honor and strength. Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. Are you going to accept, he asked, keeping his voice carefully neutral. Kraveth turned to look at him, those 4 yellow eyes reflecting the colors of the sunset. I told her no, the Vacorian said simply. Why? Kraveth made that rumbling sound that Marcus had learned to recognize as laughter. Because my place is here, small one, beside my bonded brother, wherever that path may lead us. Marcus felt the cold weight in his stomach dissolve into something warm and bright. Command wants us to train the next generation, he said. Teach other soldiers how to form cross-species partnerships like ours. Show them that cooperation is possible, even between the most different beings. That sounds like a worthy mission, Kraveth agreed. It means more time together, Marcus continued. More arguments about whose cooking is worse. More complaints about human furniture being too small. More of your terrible jokes that aren't actually funny. My jokes are excellent, Kraveth protested, though his eyes were bright with amusement. They're really not. They stood in silence for a while, watching the sun sink below the mountains and the first stars appear in the darkening sky. Can I ask you something? Marcus said. Eventually. You may ask me anything, Kaleth. Why did you let me sit at that table, back on Vethros 7? I mean, you could have scared me away like everyone else, could have told me to leave, but you didn't. Kraveth was quiet for a long moment. Because you looked at me, he finally replied. Not past me, not through me, not at the monster everyone else saw, but at me, at the person I was beneath all the fear and the prejudice. And in that moment I knew that you were different. He placed a massive hand on Marcus's shoulder, the weight of it familiar and comforting after all they had been through. I knew that you were someone worth knowing. Marcus smiled and reached up to place his own hand over Kraveth's. For what it's worth, he said quietly, I'm glad I sat down that day. As am I, small one, Kraveth replied. As am I. The last light of the sunset faded, and the stars came out in force, thousands of points of light, scattered across the darkness, like diamonds on black velvet. Somewhere out there were worlds they had fought for, worlds they had bled for, worlds that were now at peace because 2 soldiers from different planets had chosen trust over fear. The galaxy told us what we have was impossible, Marcus said softly, looking up at those distant stars. Yes, Kraveth agreed, it did. We proved them wrong. Yes, the Vacorian rumbled, and there was pride in his voice. We did. Marcus turned away from the stars and looked at his bonded brother, this 8-foot alien giant who had become the closest friend he had ever known. Ready for whatever comes next? He asked. Kraveth's 4 eyes sparkled with something that looked like joy. Together, he replied. Marcus nodded. Together. And as the night settled over the hills of Earth, 2 warriors from different worlds stood side by side in comfortable silence, watching the stars and knowing that whatever challenges the future might bring, they would face them the way they faced everything. As brothers. As Kaleth. As one.